Spectre Divide is out, and in this quick video, I'll show you how to optimize for the best possible performance. Without further ado, we're going to jump straight into the in-game settings. I'm not going to cover Windows optimization at all. Instead, in the description down below, you'll find guides to get even more performance out of your system. Starting off, this game is a super small download, and of course, it's going to be relatively simplistic to run. There are a few settings that we should adjust before we actually get in-game. On the main menu, click Settings in the top right, followed by Graphics, and over here, we'll start with General, where we'll set the display mode to full screen for the best, most consistent performance. You can play on windowed full screen, but you may notice slightly more input latency and things like that. In a game like this, it's going to be super important. Make sure VSync is also turned off, so that way you can get much higher FPS. If you experience screen tearing where the top and bottom half of your monitor don't seem to match up, then turn this back on later. It will raise your input latency, however. Then just above this, we have a frame rate limit. You can uncap the FPS, but I'd usually recommend leaving this on and capping it to slightly below the FPS you're actually getting in game for a more consistent frame pacing and feeling experience. If you're someone who records, you may want to cap this down even further to leave extra headroom for extra programs like OBS Studio, or maybe even just watching YouTube in the background so that your browser doesn't stutter. Render scaling should absolutely be set to 100%, and that's pretty much it in the top section here. Scrolling down to quality, textures can be cranked all the way up to epic. They're not going to take too much VRAM on your system, so it's not too much to worry about here. By default, effects are set to medium. I'd expect this to have some kind of an issue if it's set down so low by default, so I wouldn't really recommend raising this, but you can if you find that you're getting a super smooth experience in-game. Then post-processing, this has to do with anti-aliasing, depth of field, and other things. I'd usually recommend lowering this just for a better performing experience. However, in a game like this, it may not be super important unless you're on really low-end hardware. Then NVIDIA Reflex, if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, I'd definitely recommend setting this to on, and if you find that you have a really slow CPU and an overpowered graphics card, set this to on plus boost for better input latency. Then at the very bottom, DLSS, you wouldn't really need this, and if you have DLSS turned on to any upscaling mode, it is going to use AI to fill in the blanks. When you're rendering at a smaller resolution, cranking it up to your normal big screen. This could result in weird artifacts and things popping up that distract you in general gameplay, so if you don't need extra performance, as in you're getting a solid 60 to 100 FPS, then you should definitely leave DLSS turned off. But if you're experiencing really low FPS, you can of course enable this for a quick free boost in FPS. If you are going to use it, I'd recommend either quality, preferably, or balanced. That's pretty much as high as I would go with this. Anything higher than this is going to cause some weird artifacting and things like that. So for now, I'll leave this turned off. Then just a quick note on the General tab, they have a polling mouse support option over here. If you have a gaming mouse with a super high DPI and a super high polling rate, definitely turn this on for a better feeling experience. If you don't have a super high polling mouse or just a generic mouse, then it doesn't really matter if this is on or off. Then scrolling down to just under Other, you'll find network buffering. By default, this is set to moderate. If you live very close to the servers and have low ping, I'd recommend moving this across to minimum for an even snappier experience, taking advantage of less ping. However, if you're further away from the server, moderate is probably the best, if not maximum if you're super far away from whichever server you're connecting to. Then finally on the Crosshair tab, obviously before you play, make sure you have your crosshair set to a reasonable color that you can spot pretty quickly while you're playing the game. If you play CS2, Valorant, or anything else, I'd recommend making your crosshair as similar as possible to those games as well, just by customizing it here so you're already more used to what you're aiming at. White can be a little bit difficult to see in different scenes, although it should stand out most of the time. Finally, on the audio section, I'd recommend checking the audio output configuration and changing this from platform default to stereo headphones if you're using headphones, otherwise speakers if you're using speakers. It should give you a slightly better sounding positional audio effect to better guess where people are when you hear them moving around. Finally, on the stats tab, if you'd like to see your FPS in game, as well as frame times, render times, ping, and things like that, here is where you can enable it. I'd recommend enabling your FPS, probably as a graph, then your ping at the very bottom as a text option, as well as input packet loss as text, and state packet loss as text as well. Input packet loss is information sent from your PC to the server, and state packet loss is the other way around, from the server to your PC. That's pretty much all I'd recommend changing here, but you can of course enable more of these options, especially if you're debugging some weird issues. On the accessibility tab, I'd recommend setting motion sickness prevention to applied for less movement, less head bob and things like that, and it should just give you a better overall experience when it comes to target acquisition and staying on target, things like that. And that's pretty much it. That's all that we can customize right now. There is a huge issue with the servers. You might not even get in-game at the time of release. Speaking of, well, there you go. Anyways, this should give you a good improvement in performance. Hopefully, though, you can actually get in-game to experience it. Anyways, that's really it for this quick guide. Again, you'll find more guides for better performance in the description down below. Hopefully you found this video useful. Thank you for watching. My name's been Choppersheet, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao.